Hello everyone, my name is Marcus. Let me clarify right away that I'm not some kind of ghost hunter. I never believed in stories like that. I've never been into anything like that, and I have no idea why this story happened to me. In reality, I'm just an ordinary guy living in an ordinary town and leading an ordinary life. I hesitated for a long time before sharing this story with the public, mainly for two reasons. First, it's obvious that not many people will believe me. Second, especially towards the end, I come across as an idiot, so I apologize in advance. Please forgive any gaps in the story. If I missed anything, it's likely that certain moments just slipped my mind. Or perhaps, for personal reasons, I chose to leave them out. I'm not really much of a storyteller, so I'll just lay things out as they come. Let me start a little bit from the beginning because this story needs some context. As I said, I'm just a pretty average guy. It's not like I have a lot of hobbies, but there's one thing I truly enjoy. That's hiking. When I was a kid, my parents pushed me into the local Boy Scouts, and I gradually got into it. And what teenager wouldn't like messing around with a tent and camping by a fire? I didn't become some famous travel blogger or extreme adventurer, but my hobby lasted through school and university years. Even now, I can't imagine a weekend without a backpack on my shoulders. But back then, it was a real passion. The best part was, I wasn't alone in this. I made my first real friends through hiking. We formed a small club of like-minded people, our own little group. It was serious, we had our own jokes and real rules, local memes, a cool name, of course, and even a WhatsApp group. That's where I met Harry. Harry became my best friend, and he was a true adventurer. He hiked the entire Loppenden Ridge solo in 5.5 days, both ways. You probably don't know what that is, but in our small town, in the Zazapensk region, it's considered a difficult route. Harry would invite me on crazy trips every weekend, and he could easily spend his entire paycheck on hiking gear. People like that are often called a bit crazy, overly obsessed with their hobby. Of course, our friendship quickly went beyond the hiking community. Now, when I think back to those good old days, Harry was always there, right beside me. We drove around in his first car, which he bought on credit. We both fell into the ice on our first fishing trip. We stood shoulder to shoulder, waving at some thugs at a disco, and both ended up getting slapped. Later, we spent the night in a holding cell, again, together. In short, Harry was a great friend. He was, because he passed away about a year ago. He and Alice, a cute little brunette he'd been dating for 6 months, went on some cursed mountain trip. Their car skidded on an icy road and ended up under a truck. Harry died, and so did Alice. The news hit us like an avalanche, and we were all knocked off our feet. In our carefree, reckless youth, it was the first time we had truly faced death. A relentless force that draws a final line, after which everything that's been done is irreversible. Since then, the memory of our lost friend has lingered among us, along with the realization that things would never be the same again. We started seeing each other less, and our nature trips nearly stopped. Our conversations gradually fizzled out. I guess we all needed time to grieve in our own way. So, I wasn't really surprised when, one day, I picked up my phone and saw that someone had left our WhatsApp group. For some reason, the person apologized briefly, and then more people followed, one by one. Eventually, only 2 participants remained in the group, me and Harry. And that's when everything started. One night, I suddenly woke up. The phone screen showed 3 a.m., and there was a green notification light flashing. It was a message in our hiking group from the only person who could have sent it. "Marcus, come downstairs. I'm waiting." My sleepy, sluggish brain barely registered who was texting me and why in the middle of the night. So I managed to respond with something like, "What? Where? Why?" The screen showed the typing ellipsis, and the next message appeared. "Marcus, what floor are you on? I'll come up." I think there was something else, and I even tried to reply, but by morning, I couldn't remember a thing. The next day, the chat was empty, as it should have been. I decided that it was just a dream. Maybe it was, but as you can imagine, that's not where the story ended. One day, I stayed up late working on the computer. I had to urgently finish a project, and I hadn't even started, so I took some work home. It was around 3 a.m. again when my phone on the desk vibrated. A notification pinged. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when I finally checked, the green WhatsApp icon appeared, and there was a new message. Marcus, come downstairs. I'm waiting. I froze, paralyzed, staring at the screen as it went dark. I turned it back on. The message hadn't disappeared. There was a picture of Harry smiling happily, with his signature smile. He was standing in front of an unnamed waterfall, one we visited the year before. I remember he'd lost his hat there. On shaky legs, I stood up from the chair and slowly shuffled to the window. The apartment faced a small yard with a gazebo and a playground. The yard was well lit, and you could see everything clearly from above. I pulled the curtain aside and looked down. No one was out there. I went back to the desk, sat down, and quickly typed a message. Harry, is that you? Naturally, it couldn't have been Harry because I had been to his funeral and seen him lying in the coffin. I saw his pale, gaunt face and the gray, too-tight jacket he was wearing. By the way, it was the first and only time I saw him in a suit. Not in an old stretched-out t-shirt, not in a hiking jacket, or a casual checkered shirt, but in a formal suit. And realizing that was awful. This was supposed to happen at his wedding, on his kid's birthday, but not like this. There was no reply. I was about to put the phone down when the ellipsis appeared at the top of the screen, showing that someone on the other side was typing. I jumped up sharply, threw the phone aside, only managing to read, Marcus, what floor are you on? I'll come up. I ran to the door, gripped the door handle. With trembling hands, I checked the locks. Luckily, I never forget to lock them. Honestly, I was deeply shaken, and no logical reasoning could calm me down. I'm telling you, it's easy to be a skeptic until you're in this kind of mess. I pressed my eye to the peephole, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. For some reason, unlike the front yard, the light in our hallway had never worked. It was always pitch dark in the stairwell. As expected, my gaze met nothing but prickling darkness. I stared and listened, but couldn't make out anything, while my imagination painted terrifying pictures. The darkness was impenetrable, and the longer I stood there, the stronger the feeling grew that someone on the other side was also pressed up to the peephole, watching in return. That night, I did something people usually don't do in horror movies. I didn't go out to check. I just called the police. I lied to the officer, saying some crazy person was trying to break into my apartment. When the patrol officers arrived, after some living conversation and a clear situation, I felt somewhat relieved and managed to fall asleep. And yes, of course, the police didn't find anything unusual. I didn't approach my phone until the next day. The chat hadn't disappeared. On the contrary, the group was flooded with new messages. Marcus, I see you. Don't hide. Marcus, it's me. Marcus, the sky is broken. Marcus, it wants to take my legs. I'm scared. It's listening. It's following me. Marcus, it has no face. The lights are on. I can see them in the dark. You're here. Marcus, come with me. The last message was sent at 5 a.m. After that, the person apparently gave up trying to reach me. Even in the daylight, I could feel icy needles piercing my ribs as I read that nonsense. But I hadn't gone crazy, right? I tried to pull myself together and think clearly. It probably didn't sound very convincing, but after the sense of having done my part faded, I calmed down and dedicated the rest of the day to everyday matters. At night, as if sensing something, I woke up just a few seconds before the phone rang with a short beep. There was a message in the group. Marcus, it's me. The sleepiness left me in a hurry. I clicked on the switch and sat up on the bed. I admit, my recent overconfidence was quickly blown away. I hesitated for a long time before typing a message. Harry, hey, are you here? Silence. Harry, where are you now? What's happening? Silence. Harry, say something. On the other end, the message started being typed, and it went on for a while. Then silence fell again. And after that, one by one, pictures started flooding into the group. I froze, so petrified I could feel my heart leap into my throat as the loading circle spun on the screen. I was expecting to see something incredibly creepy, even though I couldn't say what exactly. But what filled the group were a bunch of senseless nighttime photos. You know, the kind where a weak camera flash barely lights up a patch of ground beneath the feet, and you can't make out anything. With a sinking heart, I flipped through them one by one. The only thing I could tell was that they were all taken in the forest. At least the shots always showed patches of grassy ground or some branches. On the repetitive front-facing shots, you could see a twisted tree trunk, some pine branches, or just dark nothingness and overgrown bushes. All the photos were taken chaotically, obviously in a hurry. Most were blurry, as if the photographer was using the flash as the primary light source instead of the camera. More than a dozen such pictures flooded the group, and by the end, I felt genuinely uneasy. The first photo showed some kind of clearing, where the vague outline of a tall human figure could be made out in the darkness. However, it was too dark to say anything for sure. It could have been a defect in the picture, or maybe a twisted tree branch, for example. But the second one, in the second photo, Harry, or whoever claimed to be him, tried to take a kind of selfie, but only part of his forehead and his wide open eye made it into the frame. The quality was dreadful. The skin was bleached by the camera's flash, making it look like a white sheet of paper, and the face was stretched across the frame, looking like a fried egg smeared across a pan. It was impossible to recognize anyone in the photo, but it was enough to give me a heart attack in the middle of the night. "Marcus, I'm here. It wants to watch." That was enough for me to turn off the phone and stop the conversation. I showed the chat to a couple of good friends from our hiking group. I explained everything as it was, and then watched their shocked faces. They couldn't offer me much help. They only supported my initial suspicion, a stupid prank, a hoax, and they gave me the best advice possible: leave the group and block the number. "Harry is dead," they said, patting me on the back. This is nonsense. They were completely right, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, because the messages kept coming to the group, and along with them, a small worm of doubt started eating at me from the inside, planting the absurd and impossible thought in my head: what if my friend is still alive? What if he needs help? This thought was prompted by the tone of the messages, which became darker with each passing day. But don't think I didn't try to do anything about it. I did. However, all my attempts to establish any sensible communication broke against an insurmountable wall, very much resembling madness. It was as if Harry had completely lost his mind and couldn't come back from it. Typically, my attempts to have a conversation ended the same way. Harry either gave answers that made no sense, or he went into some sort of monologue. For example, when I asked where he was, he would often reply, "In the dark, the sky is broken, I'm scared, I see lights." When I asked how I could help, his responses were something like, "I want your legs, come with me, it's cold, someone is breathing in the ground." Sure, I could have called the number at night, the only time the cursed phone wasn't turned off. I did that too, but despite Harry consistently responding with messages, he never picked up the phone, and now I'm strangely glad he didn't. I don't even want to think about what I might have heard. The only thing I remember was the cold, paralyzing waiting I endured, sitting through endless beeps, hoping he would answer. But worse than all of that were the videos. Yes, there were videos. In the chat, if you could call it that, Harry acted erratically, and I quickly lost track of any logic in his actions or words. Sometimes, he would flood the group with pictures of a black screen, but occasionally short videos would arrive. Most of them were meaningless, like one where Harry was just walking through the woods for 10 seconds, holding the camera out in front of him. But there were 3 more substantial videos, and they contained strange things. I would even say, very strange things. I mean, now they seem strange to me. Back then, they truly felt terrifying. Yes, they were really terrifying for me. And despite that, I watched and rewatched them, my eyes burning, trying to figure out the meaning. I tried to catch any small clues, which is why I remember them in such detail, even now. And here they are, in order. The first video begins with a still camera aimed at a wide, nighttime clearing. Someone, presumably Harry, is sitting on the ground, holding the phone with the camera facing forward. You can tell his hands are shaking slightly, as the image jitters and loses focus from time to time. Behind him, there's a flickering light, likely a campfire or a torch, casting a weak glow. In the background, you can hear Harry's breathing. It's hoarse and heavy, almost like he has pneumonia. Honestly, I didn't recognize him, but I didn't think much of it. So, Harry is sitting there, filming this clearing. It lasts for about a minute, during which nothing really happens. You just hear the breathing. Honestly, it's irritating, and I was already considering stopping the recording when something changed. You could tell right away by his breathing. It became quick and shallow, and the camera began shaking uncontrollably, so you couldn't make out anything. It was clear that Harry was scared of something, but you couldn't see what it was. Then, as he calms down and the image sharpens, in the darkness, on the edge of the clearing, I catch a glimpse of a human figure. At first, I thought it was a tall tree, but it moved closer. And soon, I had no doubt it was a person. They were bare-chested, tall, and very thin. In the darkness, it was hard to make out any details, and Harry was shaking the phone like crazy. But I noticed that the stranger's head was lower to his chest, and his neck was unnaturally long. That wasn't the creepiest part, though. The most unsettling detail was that this figure was walking toward Harry backwards. It wasn't walking normally, it was taking steps, then freezing in place for a few long seconds, then taking another step, freezing again. It was moving slowly but definitely moving closer. It was so slow and tense that I felt uneasy watching it. Harry was clearly terrified, but instead of running, he just stayed there, filming. As the figure approached closer, I could see its disturbing thinness, sharp shoulder blades and vertebrae sticking out under its paper-thin, grayish skin. Its arms hung limply by its sides. The stranger got halfway into the clearing when Harry's phone fell from his hands, and the video abruptly ended. Video record number 2. The second video is also set at night, and the frame shows some kind of bowl-shaped structure made of stones, filled with water. Not far off, a campfire is burning. You can't see it, but the flickering flames are reflected on the surface of the water, and in general, it's pretty well lit. For some reason, Harry spends a long time filming this bowl, then raises the camera upwards. He probably wants to show something above, maybe the night sky, but the simple phone camera can't capture such subtleties. So for a few seconds I just stare at the screen, which is completely black. Then Harry shows the bowl with water again, and then back to the sky. He repeats this a few times, and at some point, I finally notice it. Maybe the clouds have cleared, or Harry has somehow managed to focus properly, but I can now see a scattering of stars reflected on the surface of the water. He moves the camera back into the dark, then brings it back to the water, and I realize that the stars are moving in the reflection. At first, I think the surface of the water has rippled, but no, the water remains still, shimmering, while the gleaming points slowly drift along the edge of the bowl, coming together to form a glowing vortex. I try to look closer, but the camera shifts again, and when it returns, it seems that there are more stars now, and they continue to spiral, twisting into a faintly glowing spiral. The video ends there. Video record number 3. The third video is not as creepy as the first two, but it is pretty insane. It shows some homemade doll, life-sized. It looks like it's stuffed with straw or grass, and its head is just a poorly carved piece of wood. Someone has tried to carve a female face into the piece of wood, but it turned out not just sloppy, but outright terrifying. The smile looks like an open mouth screaming. The eyes are uneven, one larger than the other, and instead of a nose, there's a black hole. The doll is lying on the ground, and Harry walks around it, filming from all angles, sometimes zooming in and out, then returning to the original position and continuing to film. Then, he leans over the doll and very quietly says, "Alice, get up." Then Harry moves the camera to her face and, it seems, presses down on her chest. In the reverse movement, a high-pitched squeal pierces the air, causing me to jump in my seat. He whispers again, "Alice, get up," and the sound repeats. I realize too late that there's probably a squeaker in the doll's chest, or maybe a whole fire alarm system. This action repeats several more times before the video ends. As I mentioned, I watched these disturbing videos countless times, but nothing came of it. I don't know how to comment on them. To be honest, over the 2.5 weeks during all this craziness, I never got any closer to figuring it out. The only thing I slowly became sure of is that this wasn't some prank. On the other hand, what could I do? Report it to the police? Ridiculous. Track down Harry's parents and show them this creepy correspondence? I didn't even want to think about that. Go to psychics and witches? I'm ashamed to admit it, but yes, I did. Great idea, huh? The most interesting thing is that some of them didn't believe me at all, thinking I was just trolling them. Others filled my head with such wild, cringeworthy nonsense that I don't even want to remember it. I honestly don't know how this would have ended if Harry hadn't disappeared. Yeah, just like that. He simply stopped contacting me, and that was the end of it. For several nights, I would wake up, anxiously grab my phone, but eventually, I let it go. The phone of the subscriber was finally switched off or was out of service, with a mixture of bitterness, but also some inner relief. I came to terms with it. Whatever had been happening and whatever was still happening, it had crossed a line beyond which I could no longer do anything. I finally let go of my friend and did what I should have done long ago. I left the group and deleted all those damn files. How can I put it? I knew that even from a paranormal perspective, something didn't add up. Just take the first messages. Marcus, which floor? I'll come up. Of course, Harry knew exactly where I lived. Let's say he did come to my place at night, which means he remembered my address. So why, suddenly, did he forget which floor I lived on? Or the heavy breathing? You could hear it clearly in all the videos. I'm no expert on the supernatural, but ghosts don't breathe. These and other questions remained unanswered until what happened next. You probably guessed it, the story doesn't end here. In fact, it has the most unexpected twist. A friend of mine, one of the people I had shown the messages to, messaged me saying, "You won't believe this," and sent me a link to a local news article. I clicked on it, read it, and was indeed shocked. The place where Harry's accident occurred is a fairly remote stretch of highway near a forest that doesn't see much traffic, and there are no houses around. So, two young girls had come out there to relax, sit on the meadow, sunbathe, and mostly take photos for Instagram. You know, the usual thing, sitting on the road with their butts on the pavement, playing with their hair. And while they were doing that, suddenly, they heard a scream coming from the forest. The girls were confused, looking around, listening. Maybe someone got lost and was calling for help? Then something, or rather, someone, burst out of the woods and started running toward them. It wasn't some monster. It was a person, but a terrifying one, small, bald, wearing torn clothes, and moving on all fours like an animal, running toward them at an incredible speed with a growling sound. I, of course, made fun of the girls at first. They didn't freeze though. They immediately dashed for their car and sped off. I would probably faint at such a sight. On the way, they flagged down a police car and told the officers everything. Naturally, the cops didn't believe them at first. But when they arrived at the spot, they found the very man who had been rummaging through one of the girls' bags. The guy saw the backup arriving and took off into the forest. The cops chased him but didn't catch him, but they did find something else. The place where he had been living. Apparently, for many years. Well, how should I put this? There was a guy living in the forest. Who he was, nobody ever figured out. All they found in his lair were personal belongings, including Harry's 70-liter backpack, 2 powerful power banks, an Arctic thermos, 2 hunting knives, a compass, a multi-tool, and other similar items. Now I think that when the accident happened, the guy must have thrown the backpack out of the car, and it wasn't found, or they just didn't search for it. But this person living in the woods discovered it. Every night, he would send messages from Harry's phone until the battery and both power banks were drained. Harry never set any passwords, and the phone had pictures and contacts, and somewhere in the notes, my address was probably written down. Who this person was, I have no idea. The police didn't care. They said that the guy didn't do anything overtly horrific, and since he had only taken a purse, they didn't want to comb through the forest looking for him. There was nothing suspicious about him. No one had gone missing in the area, and there were no mass graves. No reason to think anything sinister. Just some crazy guy crawling around the forest on all fours. The news created a bit of a buzz in the local community, but it quickly faded. The lair of this golem, as we called him, became something of a local curiosity. I visited it too, a small dugout and a bunch of homemade decorations made from bird bones and feathers, hung on trees. Apparently, he had been eating those poor birds while hiding in the woods. I even found a stone structure that looked very much like that bowl from the video Harry had sent. However, this one had no water, no floating stars, just trash and pine needles collected at the bottom. The clay that held the stones together had cracked in the sun, and the bowl started falling apart into ordinary stone rubble. At this point, I could wrap it up, but I can't stop thinking about it. What the hell was all this? Why did this person only message me out of all the contacts? Was it a trap or, on the contrary, Some kind of strange cry for help? If so, what happened to him, and what was he afraid of? And the videos? The skinny person in the meadow and the stars in the water. I saw it myself, and it's too complicated to be a setup. I doubt the guy from the forest even knows what a setup is. But the last thing, if I hadn't written all this down, I would have thought this entire situation was some sort of psychiatric breakdown.